Your life begins in a small village in central England in the early 14th century. If your expectation upon hearing medieval brewer is a jolly, plump monk in a monastery cellar, laughing as he stirs a giant wooden barrel, you're not entirely wrong. But you're missing who actually made most of the beer in the entire country. In reality, almost all the ale ordinary people drank in medieval England was made by women in their own kitchens, not by men in monasteries. In this era, clean water was hard to come by and often carried disease, while brewed ale was actually safer to drink. Ale wasn't a luxury, it was a daily necessity like bread, even served to children in a weaker form, and whoever made the bread in the household usually made the ale too. That meant women, housewives like the one you would become. The brewing space was nothing more than the back room of an ordinary cottage, your mother's kitchen. From age 8, your mother started bringing you into that back kitchen to learn how to soak barley grains until they sprouted, a process called malting. You learned to soak the barley in a wooden trough, judging the timing by feel. You watched the grains sprout tiny white shoots over the following days. Then you learned to dry the malted grain over the hearth fire without burning it. One mistake in temperature could ruin your family's entire harvest for a month. You learned to measure hot water for steeping the malt, then strain the sweet liquid called wort through cloth. You added wild yeast taken from leftover bread dough, since pure cultured yeast was unknown, and fermentation depended on microorganisms no one could see. You watched fermentation bubbles slowly form on the surface overnight. At age 12, you began to understand your mother's kitchen was more than just a place to cook. Every time a new batch finished fermenting, she would hang a long pole decorated with green bushes above the front door, a sign called an ale stake, telling the whole village fresh ale was ready to sell. Neighbors came carrying their own jugs to be filled. They paid in cash at the doorway. For a while, your house became an unofficial alehouse. At age 15, a village official called the ale conner came to your house for the first time, tasked with testing ale quality and price under a royal regulation called the Assize of Ale, which set beer prices according to that season's grain prices.
His method was distinctive. He poured ale onto a wooden bench. Then he sat on it, wearing leather breeches for a while. Then stood up to check whether the leather stuck to the bench, a sign the ale still held enough residual sugar, proof of good quality. Your mother passed the test, and your family's reputation as a brewster, the official term for a female ale maker, began to spread beyond the village. The village record officially noted your family's name. Over the next 5 years, you took over most of the brewing as your mother's hands grew stiff with rheumatism. Her hands, once strong enough to stir a boiling cauldron, could barely grip anymore. You gently took the stirring paddle from her hands. You learned this trade was full of unfair administrative risk. Whenever grain prices rose, the ale conner could fine a brewster for selling too high, but rarely helped when scarce grain made ingredients hard to find. You received an unfair fine yourself from the ale conner. Male grain merchants selling in the town market faced far less scrutiny than women brewers like you. You noticed that fines against women brewers were far more frequent and harsher than those against men, a clear pattern in the village court records, even though it was never written as official policy. At age 22, you got married. Brewing remained entirely your work, not your husband's. Considered simply an extension of a woman's household duties, not an official trade recognized by any guild. Ironically, even though you managed the entire production and sale, tax and licensing records were often written under your husband's name, since property law at the time automatically made a wife's earnings belong to her husband. At age 30, you faced a new kind of competition that would change everything: hops. Dried flowers imported by merchants from Flanders and Germany began replacing the traditional spice blend called gruit. You examined the unfamiliar dried hop flowers for the first time. Beer made with hops lasted far longer without spoiling, meaning it could be produced in large batches and traded between cities, unlike your fresh homemade ale that only kept for a few days. This kind of large-scale production required capital, heavy equipment, and access to long-distance trade networks, things women rarely had, since property law and guild membership were almost entirely closed to them. Guild halls remained firmly closed to women like you.
Slowly, hopped beer made by male entrepreneurs began pushing traditional homemade ale out of the markets in major cities. City taverns now proudly served imported beer instead of homemade ale. You kept selling in the village and local markets, watching a trade that had been a woman's domain for centuries slowly get taken over by men the moment it turned from small household work into a profitable industry. At age 35, something more frightening began. The pointed cap you wore to keep your hair out of the brew was simple and practical. The broom hung by your door, once just a sign the alehouse was open, and the cat you kept to guard the grain from mice, along with the big cauldron you stirred every evening, one by one began being linked to the image of a witch, in the growing fear surrounding independent women who worked without a husband's or church's control. Village children started pointing fearfully at your silhouette. Neighbors began exchanging suspicious glances about you. You were never accused directly, but you heard that a brewster in a nearby village had her house searched after being accused by a jealous neighbor. The accusation, it turned out, came from a rival jealous of her business success, whispered quietly to a village elder. You watched all this unfold from your own doorway, gripping your apron in quiet worry. Former friends who once greeted you warmly now crossed to the other side of the path to avoid you. You sat alone by the fire at night, troubled by what you were seeing. By age 50, your hands, once strong enough to stir a boiling cauldron, now trembled with the same rheumatism that had once stopped your mother. Your grip weakened further with each passing year. Your eyesight worsened after decades working near the hearth smoke that never fully cleared from your small cottage kitchen. You sat your own daughter down at the same table where you once learned. You passed your recipe and technique onto her, just as your mother had passed it to you. Though you knew the world she would face was different, the beer industry increasingly controlled by guild-licensed men in the cities. A quiet winter settled over the cottage. Your death came at age 58 that winter, not directly from your work, but from an ordinary fever your tired body could no longer fight. The village recorded you in the church register only as a farmer's wife, not as the brewster who, for decades, had supplied half the village's daily drink. You were buried in a humble, unmarked grave in the village churchyard. Centuries later, historians would write at length about Europe's beer revolution, about hops, about the great city brewing guilds, about how beer became a massive industry that reshaped the continent's economy. They would rarely mention the names of women like you, whose trade, brewster, is barely found today among all those forgotten names. For centuries before any of that happened, it was women like you who were the reason every household in medieval England had something safe to drink every day.